Welcome to the Operate Podcast, where we give you a behind-the-scenes look at company building from the perspective of the builders themselves. This is how we operate.
Welcome to the Operate Podcast. I'm Kerry Ransom. Today's episode is sponsored by BankTech Ventures, the first strategic investment fund designed by the community banking industry for community bank innovation and investment. BankTech identifies leading products and technologies for community banks and works with the founders and management teams of those companies to maximize the impact for community banks and their businesses. If you're a bank looking to innovate and invest in your future, or a founder who wants to work with community banks, reach out to BankTech Ventures at banktechventures.com. My guest today is Samantha Berg. She's the Chief Human Resource Officer at Choice Bank. And to give you a little bit of context, Choice is one of the leading banking-as-a-service banks out there, as well as a community bank based in South Dakota. She's had a very successful career there, and we'll talk a lot about her journey and adventure there today. And she's helped them build a very interesting bank and culture, which we're going to delve deeply into today on a topic that we both share a lot of heart and interest in. Samantha, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Kerry. It's been a pleasure just to talk in our small amount we have thus far, and the partnership I know that we've had with your organization for quite some time.
Well, thank you. Well, let's start with your background at Choice. As I said, you've had a really interesting adventure, a number of different roles there so far in the 15 years that you've been there. Congratulations on that. What a great run. I guess start with first, like, what would you attribute personally your growth and success in the time that you have had there?
Yeah, this is a fun question, and my mind goes in a million different places and to a million different people. If I can narrow it down generically, I would say that, one, our CEO's desire to surround himself with the diversity. I'm formally educated in the fine arts. I think different than most in the industry. I'm opinionated and unapologetically direct. So for me to flourish, I need to be surrounded by those who not only respect different voice, but believe it a necessity. And I've had that since day one in Tellerline to, today where I'm at. So that's really ultimately helped me flourish and satisfies who I am personally and what I need. I would say two, I really like to win. So once one thing's accomplished, I haven't even taken a breath before I'm on to the next. Choice is a good place to be for that. And stars aligned and collided with amazing people who want to do great things, and we move fast. And if you can jump on and hang on, you can come along for a pretty fun, exciting ride.
Very cool. Well, let's talk about, Choice itself and winning. To your point, there aren't that many banks in the country that have pivoted their business in the way that Choice has. And so you've been there since before they did that. And I'm curious, as that was starting to happen and banking as a service and kind of the partner banking with fintechs started to occur, how did that really, get you engaged, excited, and obviously had to change some of the staffing and others. So just talk about that, like when that was starting, how that involved you in this people area, because there's so many implications to actually doing it and doing it well like you have.
I think there's so many, it starts small. And Tim Heilman, who leads our efforts in our BaaS space, does it so well in listening to the needs of customers. And I think that's what really attracted these fin companies to us, because really their only option up until, this point or, around there was large financial institutions, and they had a canned approach. They put you through. Their services were what they had. And for these companies, they needed different. And we took the time to listen And ultimately that's been a part, that's our sweet spot. It's ingrained in who we are. We listen, we create, we modify, we customize, we build. And so we do that internally, but it came as a natural way for us to start to attract some eyes toward us because it was very different than what they had been experiencing thus far.
Interesting. How has that changed the mix of people in the bank since you started?
It was really small at first, so nobody really knew. I don't think a lot of communities still know what the fintech space is, so we have to be talking about it a lot and help them understand what it is. So I would say it's changed for us a need to communicate, improve communication at all levels. That's both at the org level, but also the individual level. You can jump from meeting to meeting. You hold so much of that information to yourself that could benefit others. And the speed with which, especially that BaaS space needs to go, you just can't hold it. You've got to share it. And so there was already kind of this passion for growth and that we had in our organization. So it immediately started to pique the interests of those that wanted to be a part of something new and wanted to be in that next generation and be, really become relevant in the banking space. Because it was unheard of. It was different. It was, exciting to be this very traditional bank within the Midwest that was going to reach out and say, hey, we're going to go do it and we're going to do it different. And I think for employees, their adoption of kind of our people first, banking second mindset, to say that there's a lot of banks out there, but not a lot of them know how to put people first and be brave enough to say that banking comes second in our eyes, that you come first. And I think that's what positioned us well for people to start listening and being interested in understanding how we could help.
How have you organized the bank around these two somewhat different initiatives from a people? Because, a community bank who's historically generally been driven kind of location first, branch first, the geographic footprint versus doing something like this that has, in some cases, no geographic boundaries to it, but totally digital. How have you organized the organization around that?
We've changed a lot and frequently. So when we first started out, it was a very separate component of who we were. And it required a very different type of focus, especially in the initial conversations. But eventually what we found is, the relationship interaction might be a little different with those fintech customers, but ultimately it's banking. And we're providing the true core banking services that we provide to every other customer out there. And so we really folded it back in within the organization, especially really over the last 2 years, because the bank is the engine that supplies the product and the implementation. And so really the relationship side is a little separate or different, but we're a bank and those fintech companies need a bank and so it all plays together. So started very separate and now is very much integrated into each other.
That's interesting because I don't think that is the norm in most of your peers that are also doing this. I think most of them probably still have it as fairly separate, even lines of business to some extent. Is like, call it community banking here, banking as a service there, and may not have much crossover except at the most senior levels.
It's interesting you say that because it creates a little bit of tension. Because even from an organizational design perspective, we are offering, different value to some, especially those larger fintech companies, where we are building from scratch certain products. That requires a different type of service level. And so for some of those shared services that really support the traditional bank and support the fin, they're kind of like, well, why do we do this over here and we don't do this over there? So we've had to come in and actually do a ton of education on organizational design and different value propositions for different types of customers. So our employees, I mean, our education for even at that level for them to understand, then they can go in and step into those conversations and know, why there's different, why it feels different, and why we can't do it for every single customer in the same way, and the uniqueness, and be able to appreciate that. And so it's taken a little bit more work on our part to provide a lot of that education, but we have smarter employees for it. And they find excitement in that and appreciation for that and understanding that difference.
I can totally see that. That makes a ton of sense. So let's talk about that from just the overall talent and recruiting side. How have you changed your approach to recruiting because of this, I'll call it, evolved story of who choice is?
Luckily our reputation is getting people to talk, and that piques interest, and that's what you want. You want people telling your story for you. We know we do things different. And people want to be a part of that. But really, it's an all hands on deck recruitment philosophy. And so it looks a little different because we need all of our employees to understand all of the different things we do, because we all have networks. And we can't just be thinking about our own division and our own space. So if they have more knowledge as to the different things we do and the different cogs that work here and there, they're better able to speak to who we are, and that attracts people in itself. So it is a part of the storytelling, and it can't sit in recruiting. It can't sit in HR. It has to live within your people and the excitement and the story that you're telling. So I think that's changed things a little bit, where, traditionally, I think the mindset is, I'm a location president, I hire lenders. That's not the case anymore. We have to be thinking for all areas of the organization.
That's cool. Give me an example of maybe a story that the organization uses to go tell the story. You're mentioning that you do, a lot of like Monday morning, storytelling with the whole organization. But what's an example that people have grabbed? Because I think those company stories can be so powerful in enabling the organization to go out and talk as well.
But we have so many. so many organizations I talk to, they say, how do you dig for these stories? How do you find them? And luckily we have an employee recognition program, and it's just on fire every day. And you look through that, and you're filled with stories that you can tell other people, tell the organization about who you are and how it looks in real life. There's one simple example, and you may have even already heard this, Carrie, especially Tim loves it. It's an oldie for us, but it's a goodie, and it demonstrates our mission of people first, banking second. And it's very attractive for candidates. That's not what bankers are used to hearing. It's rooted in empowerment. For some context, we believe that all employees should be able to make decisions. Easier said than done, of course, but to place people first, no authority levels, signatures needed. So for example, we have gift cards behind all of our teller lines. If someone, anyone, a customer or a team member is having a bad day, grab one. We all know what to do. It's just most places don't allow you to do it. So order them flowers, buy them ice cream. Life can get heavy. Banking or being their employer or coworker is the bare bones of what we can do for people. So as the story goes, it's a legend around here. We're about to close. Our teller gets a call from a frantic customer saying they're on the way to the bank to make a deposit, so they wouldn't be overdrawn, but they ran out of gas. So typical story you could hear as a sob story. What does our team member do? They jump into their car, they go to the gas station, they fill up a tank, They head to the
Hmm.
customer, fill them up on us, and grab their deposit for them. So, if you can translate the story into today and all of the other areas of the organization, and to that first point I made about listening to the needs of our customer and empowering our people to do what's right. Again, that's what intrigued those fintech relationships initially. It's the same concept. It's what makes us stand out. We can listen to needs. We talk about voice of customer every day, all day, with all of our team members at all levels. So we're quick to adapt and have flexibility to move fast and provide what they need.
That's such a great story. So how do you think, now you've been in banking for most of your career so far, and so no doubt you've met other banks. How would you describe that as different from most other banks you meet?
We know it's different
Mhm.
because of the people coming into our organization and the hesitancy they experience when we teach them these principles.
Mm.
And it might be as simple like, hey, somebody's grandmother passed away, buy them flowers. And they're like, I can spend the bank's money on that. And they're like, well, who do I get approval from, or who? And so you can just tell it's something that they haven't exercised, and we know they know what's right. And so it's just, pushing and inspiring that they have all authority to do that too. And it sounds simple, but it translates into so many other areas of the organization. So it is a little bit of a battle that we fight
Sure.
when especially from really large institutions, that we have to kind of teach them to open up and let go of some of that control that they've experienced in the past.
Or lack of control, depending on how you look at it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Lack of agency,
for sure.
lack of agency. Yes.
Yes.
And that agency is a really big topic in sort of people leadership circles right now, and how, and I mean, that is living it firsthand. So cool. I know employee experience is something that you care a lot about, and you were kind of even intimating it a little bit when you talk about people coming in and learning about the employee opportunities and values when they come into choice from maybe another bank. What are some kind of approaches that you would say, how you describe that employee experience? Maybe let's go through sort of the, getting them in and then getting them to a place where they're really thriving.
So we consider a couple things. And a couple of those are what I like to refer to, and I know it's in a book. I think it's called The People Puzzle. And she references culture from two perspectives, from big C and little c. And so big C is what the org provides, the corporate culture is, and little c is your day-to-day experiences. And I think especially as we grow, we realize more and more it's the day-to-day that really matters. And so the foundation is what the big C provides. It's those values. It's our, we have cultural mindsets and key attributes. It's the stories that continue to live on, that when you start as a brand new employee, you're like, well, what the heck does that mean? It's making sure we have those written down and can speak to them and say what they mean. And then holding people accountable to those pieces at all levels, and then allowing the leaders to create an experience at that little C level, and really knowing that that's not up to us, that's up to them. So even when we talk about virtual teams, I think we're at about 30% of our workforce fully remote right now. And what we've done is created, now it started with one, now there's three virtual teams, and we mirrored it off our physical spaces. So what physical spaces add value in is it brings a whole bunch of people together that are in different areas of the organization. So you have these weird connections, weird collaborations. You find out what that person does. You're outside of your little world a little bit. So we've pulled together those kind of spaces. And so they come together. You're talking with somebody in risk when you're over in transactions or whatever it might be. And so, creating these little C atmosphere events that help people connect and flourish. And so we really focus on the two very separately. One is foundational, and then of course the little c is really the impact that they go home with every day, that, you know, they're telling their spouses about, you know, what happened for the day. And that's the stuff too, that's gotta go well.
Absolutely. How are you evaluating how people's experience is on a somewhat regular basis?
So we have a lot of space for employees to have voice on a regular basis. And a lot of those we are continuously assessing. And when we develop our strategic plans, that's one of our key stakeholders, is listening to the voice and pulling out what's important. So on top of surveys, those types of things. But one that we love, for example, we call Choice Voice. And so we pull in about 20 team members at a time. It's random selection. They have 2 members of leadership they're on a call with for an hour. There is no format. We say, what do you want to know? What are your questions? What's not going well? So ensuring that there's those touch points. We know it's not always comfortable to bring things up, but you got to be able to bring things up. You know, we talk about having a challenge culture here at Choice, and we're only our best if you can challenge what you don't like, and or what you don't agree with, or what you have different thoughts on. So it's going to have to be in those types of settings versus surveys only get you so far. And so it's just access to the employees to understand, ask questions, share their perspective. And that's just one example of the different, you know, listening channels that we have to ensure that experience is going well.
That's super helpful. Thank you for sharing. So let's talk about the next generation of talent out there. You know, you've now been in the bank for 15 years, so there is this next generation now potentially available to the bank to attract and recruit in. How do you think about appealing to this truly digital native generation to get excited about banking?
So from what a lot of the statistics show, especially as more of them are doing like personality assessments, those types of things, they want to make an impact. They want to add value, and there's a lot of ways community banks can do that. And foundationally, they can be the lifeblood for the community. Sadly, the media has portrayed banks as everything but that. So you're going to have to work extra hard to be able to help your communities understand that, and be able to speak to that and how they're making a difference. Or, you know, and if we speak to our fintech partners, they might be helping to bank the traditionally unbankable. Help that startup business manage their money. And that's at a national or even global level, for people we'd otherwise not be able to serve. So that in itself is super exciting for a lot of these people coming in, wanting to make a difference, and especially see the reach that Choice has to making a difference.
So any other things that you think about, like once you appeal to them about that impact, what are the other things you feel like you have to be cognizant of with this group to keep them excited and engaged once they come in?
You know, this goes against a lot of traditional bankers, but accept the fact they're going to do it different from you. We teach what we like to call a coaching culture, and coaching recognizes unique talent and the fact that maybe how I've been successful might not be the same for that person I'm coaching. We all love to give advice. It makes us feel good. But most success comes through trial and error. And a lot of times we just tell them exactly how to do it. And I think that's what's traditionally been seen. And some of the challenge, especially in the community banking space, you know, everybody talks about the challenge of growing young lenders up. And I think that's what's wrong is, you know, the traditional bankers are telling them how to do it, and that's just not the world anymore. And so it's giving them a little bit of freedom to go out and try it on their own way. And they've got good ways. They just need to see which ones work.
So much gold there. Samantha. That's great.
Other than that, I'd say be okay with letting them leave. That sounds maybe a little pretentious of me, but you're fighting against statistics. I am the odd man out here. I think if you're wanting to have a 20 to 30-year employee in your organization, it's just not going to happen. Let them try something else. We get a lot of team members needing to see if the grass is greener, and then they know what they have at choice and they want to come back. And that's okay.
Yeah. I think that's such a refreshing perspective. And I do tend to subscribe to this idea of give them as much opportunity as possible to learn within your organization, which often does make them super marketable to the outside world. But I think you do find increasingly that people do value that, and often they'll stay, or often they may go experience it and come back. So I think that's such a refreshing and rare perspective, as you said.
Yeah, it's so many, especially leaders, are so fearful, right? Because they think it's an insult to them if they have a team member leaving. And so we're just here to help them understand it's most of the time it's not about us. And so.
Well, you talked about the culture, you've talked about leadership a couple times. In general, as you just think about organizations, what role do you feel like leadership plays in creating that empowered, safe environment for people to thrive in?
So a lot of our kind of cultural imperatives or key attributes that we speak to, and you can't only speak to them, you have to lead, by example, or the concepts that are, failing forward, agile business models, producing MVPs. Those concepts aren't there just for product, they're for everything. So don't strive your team to work for 100%. That would drive a lot of people crazy. But push it out at 80, get the feedback, make changes. It doesn't feel good to push it out at 80, but it's the best way to get the best result in the long run. It's one of the reasons I'm not an artist professionally, because I overwork my art. That's a concept I learned here, to say, when you do try to get it to 100%, you usually fall flat on your face because you didn't get the feedback loop that was necessary in that MVP process. So, and the other way is for leaders to be vulnerable. Brene Brown would be proud. Communicate when they've made mistakes. How many failures did it take before that customer said yes? These young individuals are looking in and think you've gotten to this place by only winning. Michael Jordan taught us, how much failure it took before you actually won. And then last but not least is if you can show how you failed. This one's maybe the hardest I see, is let your people fail. Maybe not big ways, but in little ways to help them learn. Don't always be their superhero saving them. They gotta grind through it themselves sometimes.
Oh, so many good points there. That is fantastic. I think last thing I'd love to talk about on this kind of culture topic, you've alluded to some of this, but what are the things that you think most community banks or many community bank leaders get wrong when they think about their people?
Oh, that's tough. I think some of it's in control. When things get risky, when markets are like they are today, they tighten. They're scared. They allow less freedom. They allow less flexibility. There's more rules. There's, and that's scary. And I think that's just the natural tendency of the industry itself. And so that's what holds people back. We talk about, we have a lot of individuals, and we've gotten better as we've grown. We've had to. From a regulation standpoint, we have individuals come into our organization that say, okay, hand me over your procedures, your policies. And we're like, yeah, that's not how we work. So, so they're used to following a script. They're used to following a checklist, which disallows them the activity of testing and using and thinking their brain. There was one time when I oversaw the learning and development area, and I'd had a position posted. It was going to be our first org trainer, and Brian, our CEO, came into our office and he said, "Sam, until you cannot hire for this position until you can convince me that this person's going to help people be better thinkers." Because what a lot of learning and development departments do create checklists.
Yep, that's right.
And that doesn't allow people to be able to think through processes. And that's the exciting part, because technology can do that stuff. We got to be able to think through the events that are different than the norm. And so that was a really lengthy answer, but probably where I see most other bank leaders fail.
That's helpful. Well, you just talked about thinking and change. We're obviously seeing a ton overall around AI in the workplace right now. That's a potentially huge disruption, and I think potentially a huge disruption to a lot of processes, a lot of jobs in banking. How are people at Choice thinking about AI? Is it disrupting? Is it enabling in their jobs today?
I think the general feel is excitement. Now, I can't necessarily speak to the product side of what we'll be able to offer our clients, our customers, but for a small example to use is to take what would take normally 2 hours and writing a job description, which everybody in the world hates. Takes 2 seconds. And so, we had a team member say the other day, they're like, "We can do this. I can use this." And so, we see a lot of organizations out there restricting access. We're teaching safe practices. It is a tool. We don't want to restrict it. It's making us better. I think over anything else, in its simplest form, and the chat GPTs and what it is today, it just gives people a place to start. Sometimes starting is the hardest place, and you would have had to go to Google before and dig and grind and compile yourself, and it does all that. So it's going to be cool to see what kind of value it adds for the employee experience, and we're going to have to assess, is that people first? Is that not? Is it empowering? Like you said, it's a lot to think about, and to be intentional as we walk into those spaces.
Absolutely. Yeah, my current thinking, I like this adage of AI is not going to take your job, but someone who knows how to use AI may take your job.
Yes. Yeah. How to ask the right questions.
That's right.
The AI text, there's tons of certifications out there now you can take to know how to kind of navigate within it. And I think it's just getting, everyone into the practice of go there first. Save yourself time. Think there first,
That's right. Yes, absolutely. Well, you're clearly a very growth-minded and rapid learner, Sam. So let's talk about beyond all the things you've done and learned at Choice, which obviously has been a lot because the business has also evolved a tremendous amount while you've been there. So you've benefited from that. How else do you invest in yourself, in your own growth, maybe outside of Choice?
I would say I've what makes me at my best, especially for the field I'm in HR and people leadership, is being able to get the most experience with the most types of customers that I'm going to interact with. So I recently declined a peer group that was only women. And I love what they're doing to stand women up. But what I said to them is I said, respectfully speaking, half my customers are men. So this peer group does not help me understand that half. I'm limiting myself to understanding how I can serve. And so if I can I've always loved to work. My mom tells stories about in high school, I'd have 3 jobs, being tons of sports, and just work was fun. Like you got to see different people. And so I think for myself, continuously, being a part of different outside of banking, being on different boards. I love being thrown into a space I know nothing about, to the fire, being entirely in over my head and kind of having to dig my way out. That's what insane growth is about sometimes. It's nice that Choice now, we have the ability to think in advance and plan and prepare. But I would say just continuously adding me to areas that I'm not comfortable in. And our CEO is good at that. So he threw me in banking school. Well, I'm not a banker. I'm the people side, but bankers are my customers. So I better understand them. And so it's just gaining that different perspective from absolutely any place I can grab it from.
I think that experiential learning like that is so powerful. You were talking earlier about your interviewing style, which sounds like is another way that you find to learn. What you tell me more about sort of how you think about your favorite approach to interviewing someone as a potential candidate to join Choice.
Yeah. I think both interviewing and I spend a lot of time coaching, and I always tell the people I coach, I think I get more out of this than you get out of that. So I don't think you get it, but I do. So I'm constantly, open to learning and listening from what they find valuable. But interviews themselves, I'm just, I'm so curious as to what's worked, what hasn't, within their own organizations. As you know, I've been here a long time, so this is what I know, and so how I can learn what it's like other places is through those interviews and through their lenses and their experiences. And so, we talked earlier, like, how have I stayed so long here? And why have I stayed so long here? Because the interviews are great. I have insights into so many organizations out there and see what's working and why I'd want to be a part of different organizations and why I wouldn't, and why I can value and understand what I have at this place here. And one of those is, and if anybody asks me when I'm interviewed why I stay, it's because I am confident that I can learn here more than anywhere else.
And that, I think that reflection is so powerful, and far too often people don't even do that analysis to say, am I learning? Am I growing at the rate that I could? And so I that's so powerful to reflect on that and say, I'm confident I can, because that almost renews your energy in yourself and in the organization, I would imagine.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you mentioned this earlier as far as having a partially remote group. If you were to pick, let's say you had to pick fully remote or fully in office, which one would you choose?
I'm so happy we live in the flexibility world, Carrie. That's not your answer, though. I personally prefer in office. I mentally love the separation that helps me prioritize where I spend my time. If I'm at home, right, I've got two boys. They're not there, but the chaos is still there, even though they're not there. The dishes, the fingerprints, the everything. And when I'm physically at work, my mind isn't there, and that's a good thing. So I can entirely focus where I need to. And for me personally, I get energy from physical human interactions. Some people don't, and that's okay. But I do, and I know I'm a much better person, a better worker. I am on top of my game when I can get some of that physical interaction. And so it's best for the organization for me here and my family. They like a little separation too.
Sure. I totally get that. Has your view on, I'll call it fully in office, fully remote, hybrid, and the variations, has that changed at all in the last year, let's say, versus where it was a year or two ago?
There's so many varying statistics, whichever case you want to make, you can go find your information for, which makes it tough.
That's right.
And so I've spoken about this before, but, and I think this speaks back to something I mentioned earlier about helping employees make decisions for themselves. And if they have the customer in mind and what the customer needs, and even what the perception the customer might have if you're at home, if you can walk through all of those scenarios, we have a high performing organization. We hold people accountable. It can be done. It doesn't mean it's not going to work for some people, and you have to address it. So if you're a company that doesn't like to have hard conversations, it's not going to work. Because it puts you in positions that are sometimes tough because you're not there to see it. Which, if, especially, I think this happens in banking and hierarchy and traditional organizations, if you believe you have to go to the person's supervisor to address things and create this triangle, that's really not going to work. So, we're a screens on organization, video on organization, and have been since 2015. And so we had video phones way before COVID. And it is an absolute expectation to have them on. We'll call you out. And so it's finding ways intentionally to ensure that we're connecting people and collaborating. There are ways to do it well.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's project forward a decade, Sam. What do you think will be most different in community banks with regard to talent and people?
It's tough because I think they've said for the last 10 years, if not longer, there will be no brick and mortars. But that's proving itself a little otherwise, that there's, I think there's space for the technology companies. I think there's space for the physical interaction. What you're not going to see is the technical need at the physical location. So, and this is what I'm hoping for, and something that you mentioned, those technical boxes can be checked by technology, and we can provide value and advice and listening, uniquely to that customer, which technology can never do. So I think it only enhances what we can provide. It's just being able to think a little differently with how that looks. And I think our entire organization knows that you're going to have a job here. It just might look a lot different. And be okay and comfortable with that, because that is the nature of our business in the world today.
Do you think, just as a follow-on to that, do you think people will need to know more about their customers' businesses, financial lives, other things beyond banking to be successful 5-10 years from now?
My gosh, I don't know, because the technology it already knows all of that. So I think we just have to ask, in what value can we be there then? If they have all of that access at their fingertips already, do we really need to go out and know that? I don't know. I think we just need to ask the right questions and, essentially almost become, which many of our bankers are, and a little coach-like, and just help direct them in the path they want to move forward to. And, the services and products will be there pretty naturally with technology.
Sam, final question, as our time's coming to an end. What would you say you're most excited about for you and your team at Choice Bank for the rest of the year?
Carrie, this is probably the hardest question you sent me, because it paused me a little bit, because my mind's planning 2024. And so my 2023 is kind of already mentally over. So I'm like, so I had to slow myself down a little bit and say, gosh,
it's been a busy first half of the year, that's for sure, in banking. Come on.
It has. And that was the first thing that came to mind. We're maybe 2 weeks out from closing an exam out, and had everything with, the financial industry upheaval. So first thing that came to mind was celebration of everything that we've gone through. And it's something we constantly ask ourselves. We begin almost every meeting with, is what's working, because it's a way to celebrate. So one, celebrate, and it's really just enjoying what we talk about is enjoying the journey. It's not, these moments of what's going to happen yet in 2023. It's you're along for the ride. And even that, week of SVB, I think it felt like a month for a lot of people. And but that's a part of the journey and the excitement to, come out of those spaces and be confident with where we're at and excited with where we're at, and in a very different position than most banks are out there. We're in growth mode, and a lot of other financial institutions are looking inside themselves to say, how can we survive in this? How can we make cuts? Where can we shave off a little bit here and there? So just the appreciation and how fortunate we are and the things we've gotten into position ourselves for the success we're seeing, even amidst the mini crisis that's happening out there.
Well, thank you so much for joining. And as I knew we would have, what a fun conversation. That appreciate you sharing just so openly your people and leadership and culture philosophies, and it's so refreshing. And as you said, it's different than what not just you see in a lot of other banks, but I think what you see in a lot of other organizations. And I know it. I've been a part of a lot of different organizations, and certainly get exposed to many as well. And I really am going to encourage a lot of our banks to listen to this, because I think they can benchmark where they are today and probably where they should be, because you all at Choice are definitely a benchmark that other banks want to try to aspire to reach. And congratulations on all the success, and look forward to continuing to work with you all in the days to come.
Well, thank you, Carrie, and thank you to your team. You're the kind of people we like to surround ourselves, because you push us, and that makes us better. So thank you for your partnership and everything that you've been doing for all community banks out there.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Operate Podcast. If you like this conversation, as a favor to me, you can rate us, review us, or subscribe, or tell your friends. You can also reach out to us on Twitter at Operate Podcast. Until next week, get out there and operate.